Welcome to Craft Chat Chronicles, the go-to podcast for tips on crafting best-selling fiction. Here at Craft Chat Chronicles, we bring you expert interviews, insights, and tips on writing, publishing, and marketing. Join the conversation and embark on a new chapter in your writing journey. For workshops, show notes, and more information, visit jdmyall.com. That's jdmyall.com.
On episode 6 of Craft Chat Chronicles, we have YA author and children's picture book author, Sarah Glenn Marsh. All right, everybody, welcome to tonight's Craft Chat. Tonight, we have the honor of hosting the lovely Sarah Glenn Marsh. She's an award-winning author known for her best-selling and enthralling novels like Rain of the beloved children's picture books like Nita's Big World. Tonight, Sarah publishing journey, offer valuable advice on creating picture books, talk about writing craft, and give you some tips for making fabulous fantasies. Welcome again, Sarah.
Thank you.
Can we start with you telling everybody a little bit about your publishing journey?
Absolutely. Yeah. So honestly, growing up, I loved reading and writing. I was the kid who checked out I would check out a stack of books from the library every week. I was that kid. I was a voracious reader. Reading was what got me in trouble growing up the most. I would get in trouble at home with my grandparents or my parents for reading at the table, because it was what I preferred doing. And I would get in trouble in school for reading under my desk. But the thing is, I was getting straight A's, but they were still mad. That's fine, whatever. So I was that kid who always literally had my head in a book. But nobody ever really talked to me about writing as a career, sort of the reality of that, how achievable it was. I always considered authors to be these very mysterious, unapproachable, distant figures, because how can you be one? I don't know. I mean, this was a little not too pre-internet, but it was just a mysterious thing to me, and I never had the opportunity to listen to a published author and sort of learn from them about what that career looked like. I took creative writing in high school, absolutely loved it, and I had a teacher who really encouraged me, my creative writing teacher, and we're actually still in touch. She was a wonderful mentor and the first person to kind of make me think that there was something there with my writing that might be a little different or a little more, that I had to look at as something a little special. So I went to school. I went to University of Mary Washington, and I got my master's in elementary education. That was my background. I wasn't thinking about being a writer, but while I was in that program, my favorite professor actually, she ran a literacy specialization that I took part in. And so this was an extra piece to your degree. It was what you focused in on. And of course I picked literacy. And she really inspired in me a love of children's picture books. Mm-hmm. And she was an incredible professor because she would actually read children's picture books in our classes to foster a genuine appreciation. And she brought in authors. Mm-hmm. And so for the first time, I got to sort of connect and see some of these people face to face. And then on the other side of it, I was going into classrooms, right, working on my degree in teaching, and I got to spend a lot of time, especially helping reluctant readers, which was my favorite thing. I remember reading with this little boy who was having a lot of difficulties with having stable figures at home, and he looked forward to reading with me every day after school before he got called to walk home. And, getting to connect with kids through stories was a really special thing for me that kind of always stuck. So then I graduated. I was looking for a teaching job, and my partner said to me, "You should really write a book." And I was like, "What do you mean write a book?" And he was like, "Well, pause the job search, write a book." And I was like, "That doesn't sound like a great idea. Thank you. I wouldn't know what to do. What do you mean write a book?" And it was the strangest thing for him to say, because he's not an avid reader himself. So he hadn't really read any of my writing. And he was like, "Well, but you have so many books and you read so many books, and I know you love to write." And he was like, "Try it." So while I had a temp job, I used their old computer and wrote my first novel. It was terrible, but I did send it to agents. And when I got their rejections, I was so mad. And when I get mad, I get very motivated. I find anger is a fantastic motivator. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to show all of them. And I'm going to write something that's so commercial that they can't tell me no. So I went back and I wrote a second book. I wrote a ghost story. And it had issues, but I actually, the funny thing is that ghost story, it was what got me my first agent, got me 4 offers of representation. This was all within about I'd say like a 6-month period back in like 2014. And I signed with my agent. That book, we did not seek out publication for it right away, but much later down the line, it became one of my books with Penguin, The Girls Are Never Gone. Mm-hmm. I went back into that old manuscript, harvested the bones of it and the things that I loved, and, transformed it into something else. And so that story actually lives on. All the characters are the same names, same setting. But that was really how I got started. It was that second book, and I had entered that book in a contest while I was writing it. I was lucky enough to receive feedback from a published author, Susan Dennard. And again, leaning on people who have that job and who have that experience was absolutely vital to me understanding how to do it. Because what she said, these are the conventions we use in publishing, and this is the way that we do this, it all clicked for me. And I said, oh, well, actually, that's not true. I read her feedback and I deleted my book off my laptop. And I put my laptop under the bed and I said I was never writing again. This lasted about 2 weeks. I was in the shower and it hit me. So about 2 weeks later, I'm in the shower and it hit me like a ton of bricks, how everything she said was true and how to fix the whole novel based on her amazing feedback. So I went in, I dug in, and after revising it, I sought out agents, and I got agented pretty much right away. That is not usual. I feel I was very fortunate, and I learned a lot. I'm now with my third agent. There's a lot of turnover in publishing, but I mean, really, I've learned with every agent. I'm very happy. I'm at Jill Grinberg now, and I'm very happy there. And I'm working across children's, middle grade, young adult, and also adult. I also, in addition to my own work, I also do IP work, intellectual property, meaning I've written for Crayola, I've written for the Smithsonian, I've written for Star Wars, and I am currently writing for something popular franchise, but it's not yet announced. So I should probably stop myself. That is the gist of my publishing journey so far. I have over 20 titles published to my backlist. I work primarily with Penguin, but with other publishers as well. And I have several books in various stages of contracts and publication right now. So
I love that. What do you think you did right that helped you break into the publishing industry?
The number one thing I think, aside from just being a very avid reader, I think it was my ability to connect with others and to take feedback. Because one thing that I think may not be as apparent from the outside with publishing is just how collaborative it is every step of the way. So let's say you've written this book that you absolutely love. You're going to have to change it. You're going to change the whole thing with your agent. And then you're like, oh gosh, that was so much work. That was so harrowing. I've changed my whole novel with my agent. It's not what I started with. I feel some kind of way about that. Well, you can't feel too much about it because you're going to have to change it with your editor, probably 3 or 4 times. And then the amount of people who work on a book, I've seen a figure quoted somewhere. I don't want to say this as absolute point of fact because I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's something like 70 people from sales, marketing, editing, and all the different departments will touch a traditionally published book before it's actually on the shelves. So there's this whole team of professionals looking over your work. You've really got to be open to feedback and collaboration and to look at it as a collaborative effort. And then at the same time, I say that, and I think that is what I did right. And yet the other piece is you have to be able to advocate for yourself when the time is right. That is something else that I have really learned along the way, the power of advocating for yourself, because You have to know when the feedback is altering your story too much. You have to know when to stand up for yourself, when something isn't sitting right in your gut, and how to speak up in a way that gets you listened to and not shut down. So.
I love that. What was the most surprising experience you've had in your publishing journey so far?
Surprising. Well, that's a great question. I would say something that was really fun, or it was a really cute surprise. I went up, so when my book Reign of the Fallen was about to be published, I went up to New York to meet with my editor. And we had a really nice conversation. She and I were good friends. She's since moved on from the industry, and I miss her a ton. She's a great person. We were very good friends. I came up, we had a nice time. She let me pick out books from the shelves of yet to be published titles at Penguin, which was really fun. But then she was like, we're going to go downstairs for a minute. And we rode the elevator down to the Penguin building, several floors. And there was a room, and it was all set up, and they had decorated it to match with the Reign of the Fallen book cover. And we had a surprise champagne brunch, and everyone from Penguin came down, and the head of my imprint gave a big toast. And it was very surprising and very, very sweet, and just such a surreal moment of having put in the work and seeing it touch all these different people. That was incredibly special. And likewise, the turnout for the Reign of the Fallen launch, I had a reader fly in from Mexico. I would not fly from Mexico to meet myself, let me tell you what. And so it was very surprising and very, very surreal, that whole experience. And, my takeaway from that, actually, from that surprising, wonderful experience is I don't need champagne brunch, and I don't need frills, and I don't need to be anyone's darling when it comes to my work. But what I do need is an enthusiastic, responsive, supportive publisher. So,
love that.
Yeah.
What's the story behind the story? Can you tell us how your current novel came to be?
My current novel. Well, oh my gosh, I have so many different current things going on. Let me see. So right now, this one's been announced. I just did a book called How to Spot a Fairy, a field guide to sprites, spriggans, and more. And so How to Spot a Fairy is a compendium of fairy folklore. This was an incredibly fun project. This started as IP, intellectual property. So a publisher had an idea to do a folklore series, and they approached me and asked if I would be interested. My own background, I am Irish. My father's family is from a town called Kerseveen. So Kerseveen is in South Kerry. It's a town of about 1,000 people. But I love it. I think it's a really special place. It's out near the Skellig Islands where they filmed Star Wars. So folks might know that. And that's where I'm from. And there is a very rich culture, a rich history that I grew up with surrounding fairies. There are folks over there, especially out in the countryside, and especially in rural places like Kerry, who still believe in fairies. And I mean, that belief is like just very much alive and present, to where you can almost feel like you are somewhere where magic exists, or like that is possible, and people fear and respect it. So when I got asked to do a compendium of fairy folklore, it's for a middle grade audience. I felt like I was absolutely the right person to do it. Kids don't like cutesy fairies, and I think that because of my Irish background, I brought to it a healthy respect and fear of how horrible these things can actually be, that I think kids will find fascinating, but tempered with like not too scary and awful, if that makes sense. I'm a mom of a 2-year-old little girl, and so I do also have like that mom sensibility, like walking the line of like what is too much. So that book, I got to delve into like fairy legends from around the world. The term fairy is primarily like a very Western European, very localized to like the UK, Ireland, and Wales concept, but I took it and gave it a more like global view, which was really fun to make it accessible for kids around the world. And I got to help choose the illustrator. Her name is Lilla. She's from Eastern Europe, and her illustrations are Like they're very spooky. They've got that proper sense of fairy where like you have a healthy fear of them. And the whole book is it's like an art book. So it's filled with mythology, but also art. There are like pull out maps and stuff. And this thing is brilliant. I just saw a final look through, I think like 2 weeks ago, and okayed it to go to the printer. So that'll be out this fall, and I'm really excited about it.
Awesome. What's it like working with an illustrator? Do you usually get to pick your own?
You know what? So that really depends on the quality of, well, a couple things. Like it depends on your agent. My agent always tries to advocate for me to have as much rights as possible, and that includes illustration rights insofar as having input. How it's typically worked, so there have been a few picture book deals I've had, or things that involve art where they pick someone for me and they're just like, this is who's illustrating it. And I'm like, oh, that's news to me. Okay. Other times, however, especially with my agent advocating, I'll get to look at portfolios for, say, like their top 3 choices and say, I want you to approach this person. Like this feels right to me. And then this is my second choice. In the case of How to Spot a Fairy, that was how that was done. Lilla was my first pick. And I was like, I really, really need you guys to get her for this project. And it's not announced yet, but probably it's probably a series. There are probably going to be more of these books and more art, and it's probably a whole concept. So I'm really looking forward to seeing more of what she does. I've actually maybe seen some sketches for a second something that's going to follow. So
what are the essential elements of a good picture book?
That is a great question. So picture books, I always tell people, they're actually harder to write than novels, which sounds weird. And I know, of course, novels take longer, but picture books, oh my gosh. Nowadays, kids' attention spans are really short, and parents are tired at night when they're reading to their kids. So like the ideal length of a picture book, you're looking at 500 to 700 words. That is not a lot of space. That is very small. That is a few pages at most. And in those 500 words, you have to have an entire character arc. You have to introduce your main character. They have to have a problem. There's a story problem. They have to try to resolve it. And then you have your resolution and your denouement and wrap up in 500 words. That is very, very, very difficult. And so what ends up happening is every single word has to carry so much weight. I myself am a picture book writer. I am not a picture book illustrator. And so for me, I'd say one of the elements of a good picture book text is actually keeping that in mind. When I write a picture book, I am writing half the story. And so I think that's a really good element of the text, is it's telling half of the story, because I'm literally letting the illustrator carry the other half. I need to make that text open enough to where they are also telling a story, and that their illustrations are adding detail and depth to what is happening. And it is a very difficult thing, not only to compress a whole story into 500 words and make it satisfying, but also to know that somebody else is going to be telling the story alongside you, and to leave room for them to have creative freedom also. That is an art. I think picture books are very, very challenging. Things like when we talk about elements of a great picture book, it used to be that rhyme was very popular. I've seen that like come and go time and again. I wouldn't necessarily say that a great picture book has to rhyme, but I would say that every word has to carry weight, and that a good picture book text allows for the illustrations to carry the story.
Hey, JD Mile here. Thanks for supporting the show. Today's episode was brought to you by my debut novel, Heart's Gambit, coming to bookstores in February of 2026. 2 time-traveling Black families, 1 cursed magical duel, and the pair of star-crossed lovers who just might break the cycle if they don't break each other first. If you like the love and time travel of Outlander mixed with the magic of the night circus, don't worry. Heart's Gambit is coming soon. In the meantime, please support today's guest by running out and buying their book. Thanks for supporting the show. Now, let's get chatty as Craft Chat Chronicles continues. I love that. Since you brought up fairies earlier, let's get into some magic system questions. Right. What makes a good magic system? And can you explain for people who haven't read Reign of the Fallen, what the magic system is like in that series?
Yeah, absolutely. I will start with, let me start with the first part of that. So what makes like a solid magic system? For myself, as someone who grew up reading a lot of fantasy, and, you know, as a kid, I actually read a lot of adult fantasy. That's what I was drawn to. I have time and again been immersed into very complex worlds where the magic system is either never clear to me or, you know, it's vast, it's overwhelming, and it's too vague. I would say one element of a great magic system is specificity. I would encourage an author who is working with a magic system to be as specific as possible. And in particular, when we talk about magic, magic has a cost. And I think that this is a very important concept when we're considering a magic system, that magic has a price. And I think that it's really important, and I did this in Reign of the Fallen, to like consider the physical or emotional toll that using something that is this force beyond us takes on us. Because magic, to perform magic, magic is taking something from you. And so I think that a good magic system considers the consequences of using that magic. Again, I also think it is specific. And I think that one way to do that is to pick a central theme or topic that is very relevant to your story and to your characters, and to then shape your magic system around that. So in Reign of the Fallen, the magic system, I wanted to, again, keeping in mind the body and that it's human beings who are wielding the magic, their magic system is based on their eye color. But it isn't assigning arbitrary powers to an eye color. What it is that each different eye color is born innately. All people that have that eye color are born with the ability to see something that the other eye colors don't see. So for instance, in Reign of the Fallen, people with blue eyes see doorways into the land of the dead, into the spirit world. People with other eye colors cannot see that. Thus, they cannot access this form of magic. And so that is, I went through the usual eye colors in the first book. In the second book, I get into the questions that teens often have for me when I go to school events. The first question they always ask me at high school is, what about people with like, I think it's called like heterochromia, where they have two different iris colors. And I'm always like, read book 2, because you will meet people with some different abilities. And you'll see that the magic actually stays kind of consistent, what they can do with knowing their eye colors. So I do address sort of those what ifs in the second book, which is, so I think a good magic system really thinks through consequences and thinks through how it impacts the world. In Reign of the Fallen, one of the central themes is death. And so a lot of the overarching world building is shaped around death and different cultures and religions practices, like in our world, surrounding death. I pulled from many different cultures. Yeah.
I love that. How do you handle exposition in fantasy without overwhelming readers?
Oh my goodness. That is a great question. And how I like to open, when I hear that question, how I like to open it is with a piece of advice that I was given when I was starting out that has always stayed with me. And to correctly attribute it, this was advice from editor Cheryl A. Klein, formerly at Scholastic. I don't know where she is now. But here's what this editor, and it's brilliant. She said that when you look at a scene on the whole, and I think this is especially relevant for fantasy, when you look at a scene, every scene should be an equal mix of action, dialogue, and description. So if I were to look at a scene and I've hit you with like several paragraphs of exposition in a row, some of that's going to have to get cut and come out. If you're bored, if you're info dumping, your reader is bored. They're bored too. It takes work to refine that balance, but action, dialogue, and description. If you can try to make sure that you are seamlessly weaving those three elements through, you won't be having long paragraphs of exposition. Those should definitely be broken up by those other elements.
What advice do you have to writers on developing their own fantasy worlds and making them unique?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've done Reign of the Fallen. I developed my own. That's a second world fantasy. So that's where I literally built my own world from scratch. There are a lot of great resources online you can access that will ask you questions that you can sort of think through that will help set your world apart once you can answer them. Again, I think that sort of picking a theme that is central to the plot, to your narrative, and shaping the world around that can be wonderfully distinct. So for Rain, it was death, and I researched all these different death rituals, and I was like, well, what would this look like in practice? So dead people, right? They're walking around. What does that look like? Well, I thought to myself, death, it probably smells. And so the dead people, they wear herbs on their person. They wear little satchels of herbs and perfumes to try to smell better because death is decay. Creating a believable world is really in the details, is what I'm saying. It's about thinking through the most minute thing and then how does that affect the whole culture? How does that shape these people? Like how do the magic systems or the things that you're trying to express through this world, how do those affect people every day? It's really in the details. And so I like to keep a binder with my world building details. That was especially helpful with Reign of the Fallen because there was a sequel. They bought 2 books at once. And by the time I went to go write that sequel, I had forgotten so many things. You forget. You're living life. Life's hard. You forget things. And so I sat down to write the sequel and I said to myself, man, some fan is going to yell at me because I'm going to get somebody's eye color wrong. It's going to throw off the whole book. So I kept a binder with all of those world building details and referred back to it frequently as I wrote. I think that is a really helpful thing to have all your stuff gathered in one place. But you can also write something set in the real world and make it your own. I also write historical fantasy. And for that, I wrote a book that has sea monsters. I've written books that have fairies. I basically did a lot of research and created my own fairy lore. I created my own sea monster lore based off existing monsters from different cultures. So lots of research and lots of detail.
Okay, that leads me to one of our questions in the chat.
Sure.
Seth wanted to know, what is your research process like, and do you have any favorite resources?
Oh, that's a great question. So let me start with research process, and I'll circle back to resources. Remind me. So it is really different for every single book. It depends what I need to research. So I wrote a book called Fear the Drowning Deep. That book was set on the Isle of Man. Well, I've never been to the Isle of Man. I am Irish. I've been close to it. Haven't been there. It's really hard to get a boat over. So what did I do? I bought books from a local bookstore on the Isle of Man and had them shipped here and waited 3 weeks for them to arrive. I educated myself on their culture and their beliefs. I read about their language. When I was trying to develop character names, I actually pulled census data from the time period I was writing in and cobbled together names that way. Since I hadn't been there, I went on YouTube and I would watch. There is a famous motorcycle race that takes place on the Isle of Man, and I would watch those motorcycle races, not for the bikes, but to look at the background scenery because they were driving the whole island. And thus I was getting to look at the beaches and look at the terrain and be able to better describe it. Also, the reporters who report that event are Manx, and I was able to listen to their accents so that I could better write it. Yeah, it's really unique to every book and what it needs. I wrote a book that's a ghost story. It involves a girl going to this old crumbling estate, and she volunteers to help turn it into a museum. It's going to be a historical museum. And so I actually have a haunted house in my family that is a historical museum. And for that one, I went out to my family's house. And I talk to all the volunteers. So it really depends on the situation, on what the book needs. Insofar as writing resources, things that I would point you to that I think cover a lot. If you are querying agents, you are going to want to look at Query Tracker. I think the forums at Agent Query Connect are fantastic. I critiqued a lot of queries there and had my own query letters to agents critiqued there. That was very helpful. A good general writing resource and forum would be Absolute Right. I highly recommend their forums as well. So,
okay. Carl says, in a picture book project, who starts first, the writer or the illustrator? And do you ever do it at the same time? Is it in parallel?
So in my own experience and based on my larger understanding, it is never parallel. So what happens is I write the text first, and typically I have that text edited with the editor and completely finalized before they hire an illustrator. Now, during that process, then they come in, they get hired, and then they're illustrating. Typically, I have no contact with them. Occasionally, I will. I have type 1 diabetes. It's sometimes called juvenile diabetes, and I wrote a book about that for children who are newly diagnosed and living with the disease. And for that, the illustrator consulted with me about what the medical devices are supposed to look like. Mm-hmm. So there are times where it's necessary, but typically no, I have no involvement with the illustrator, and typically my end is done first. So there is a finalized text from which they are working. And I will sometimes leave relevant notes underneath lines of text if it's really important. So.
Okay, Seth had one more question about your notebook that you mentioned earlier. Seth wanted to know if you use templates or if you design the notebook elements yourself.
That's a great question too. I actually designed the elements myself. I didn't use any kind of templates. It was, all pulled from my brain. And I am one of those type A people who is very organized. And so I kept a name bank, and I even printed that out. And I had all these reference materials that I organized myself. Yeah.
That's cool. Carl wants to know, can you give some markers that define middle grade in terms of appropriate content these days? And these days it feels like they're pushing some of the old limits. And I think there was a question about, is it good for marketing too? And yeah.
Okay. So middle grade elements, what defines a good, when we think about middle grade? For myself, when I think of middle grade, I still think of, say, the first Harry Potter book. That is very classically middle grade. When I think of middle grade, I have noticed that middle grade is starting to include some elements like romance. Mm-hmm. And I'm of mixed opinion about it because, for myself, when I was the age of a middle grade reader, I wasn't interested in romance. I was still reading the Saddle Club. I didn't want to talk about boys or girls. I just wanted to ride my horse and sing songs and watch TV and hang out with my friends. So, I typically tend to think of the middle grade sensibility as having very little to no romance, or, crushes would be appropriate, I think, at middle grade age. The middle grade audience, we say middle grade, and I think a lot of us think middle school. Well, children will typically read older. So the kids who are reading middle grade are 10 years old because they're reading about 13-year-olds and they're like, oh, this is edgy and cool. But so you've got to keep in mind the actual age of those readers for who that's targeted to are about 10 years old. When I wrote my first middle grade, it was actually a rewrite of an older fantasy project that I had done, meaning for older readers. And when I rewrote it, I had these two girls, they were sisters, they were alone in the woods and someone was watching them. And my agent goes, no. She was like, nope, take that out. She was like, that is absolutely sinister. They don't have a parent or guardian. They're in the woods by themselves and there's a creepy person watching them. No, this is not safe. And she was like, this is not an appropriate scenario for middle grade. Mm-hmm. So even I have had to learn to tone down my voice and sensibilities when it comes to middle grade. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a fine balance. What I'm saying there is it's definitely tough. So.
Another question from the chat. Somebody wants to know, have you ever had an experience where you were not quite satisfied with the illustrator, and how did you handle it?
Ooh, Ooh, good question. I'm turning my head because I'm looking over at my picture books. I don't want to name any names or be too specific. I have one where the art is not a style that I would have chosen, but the illustrator is very celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
So honestly, in that case, because they chose and it wasn't anything to do with me, I just, you kind of have to be classy and say thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If there were an actual problem. So for instance, working on how to spot a fairy, I actually asked for the fairies to be inclusive. So I gave a lot of hands-on guidance there. There's an elf in a wheelchair. I wanted the fairies to reflect real children. So some of them have mobility aids. Some of them have part of a mechanical wing, things like this, so that real children could see themselves. Some of them have glasses. They have a range of different skin tones. They're pretty cool. But Lila tried to include a fairy with an insulin pump, and she misunderstood what that was. And I think I went back and forth with her 3 times. I went through my editor. I just keep everyone CC'd, so we have clear communication. And yeah, so if there's an important issue, I'll push back politely in an email. I just keep good communication. I tag my agent, and then that way my agent is also overseeing whatever issue is going on and keeping an eye on it. Yeah.
I love that. A lot of people don't know that you have also done some sensitivity reading and stuff like that.
I sure have. I did one of my favorite projects. I did a sensitivity read for Little Brown. And it was for an author I love, and she had written a book that included a type 1 diabetic main character. However, she herself does not have type 1 diabetes, and she really cared, and she had done a ton of research, and she wanted to get it right. And it really struck me that even with the ton of research, she'd gotten a lot of stuff wrong. So when I started that read, one thing that stuck out, I remember this character, she wakes up and she's giving her little brother his insulin. He's the type 1 diabetic. And she says his blood sugar is 56 and she's going to give him some insulin. Oh my God. No, no, don't do that. You'll kill him. No. So things like this that just, to me, they're second nature. Even with her well-intentioned research, she still needed the guidance of a sensitivity reader. I've also used sensitivity readers in my own work. I have included, for instance, gender fluid, non-binary characters, and I use sensitivity readers for that because that is outside of my lived experience. And it's just amazing the things that you learn from other people's lived experiences when they read and weigh in on your book.
I love that. We were actually having the conversation in one of our other craft chats about diversity and inclusion and things of that nature in stories. And a lot of people are fearful of making their stories diverse because they're afraid of doing something wrong. And
Yeah.
I've never shied away from that. So I appreciate that about your writing. It's always inclusive. Kids can always see themselves.
The thing is, that's how the world is. And as someone who has, if you look at me, you might not know I have a disease unless I literally show you my insulin pump. There's my pancreas, right? Otherwise you wouldn't know. It's hidden away. And I just, there are examples of diversity we see every single day, and there are ones we don't even see. And so because of that, I just try to be very mindful of that. And I feel like writing should reflect the real world, even if we're, say, in a fantasy setting. And because even when we're in a fantasy setting, what we're doing is we're exploring real world issues and real topics, and those affect everybody. So yeah, I feel very strongly about making sure that my work reflects everyone regardless of the setting.
Love that. There's a question in the chat. Somebody wants to know how you became a sensitivity reader.
Okay, so that's a great question too. I know that there are some databases where you can sign up to offer that service. I don't specifically have the name of them in front of me, so I would have to go look that up. But I've got them bookmarked, I'm aware, and you can search, sensitivity reader database, and you can actually register and become one. You can put yourself on a list so that you're visible so people can reach out to you. I did not do that. This author was aware of me, and I, of course, when I'm online, if I'm posting anything, I try to share about my life, about my disease, what's hard about that. So she knew I was a type 1 diabetic. She asked for her editor specifically to get me if I was willing to do this work. So the publisher approached me. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Let's move on to talking a little bit about writing craft. What do you think makes compelling characters?
So here's my trick with characters. We could talk about at length about main characters, but this is my secret to get a novel where you like all the characters or you feel something, they make you feel something. I give every single character in my books an arc, whether they are the main character or the smallest side character. I give them, so side character C, they start the story this one way, and the events of the story shape their life in this way, and here is where they end up. And before I start writing a book, I think through an arc, even if it's minor, for every single character, so that I know that every character is going to be shaped by the events in the story. They're going to grow and change along with the narrative. So by the time you're done, all the people that you're interacting with, they've interacted with this plot and these problems, and they have all come out changed. And I think that that is something people could do or spend more time on up front to create really dynamic characters that really feel a part of the world and feel like fully actualized people.
I love that. What makes a good villain?
I love this question. Villains for me, it's I'm sure you've heard this term. It comes up a lot these days. Morally gray, shades of gray. I've lived enough life to know that most people are not wholly good or wholly bad. And so I think when we consider our villains, creating a villain, there has to be something about them that either humanizes them or in some way helps the reader relate to their motivations. So for instance, and I'll use Reign of the Fallen again as an example here real quick. The villain there, his motivation is actually really good. If you take away the way that he's going about it, which is freaking terrible, we don't murder and all these things, he's going about it in a horrible way. His intention isn't bad. The thing that he wants is something that readers will understand their society needs it. And so I think that making sure your villain comes across as human, as flawed, as having some redeemable aspects or having motivations that aren't just kill, murder, destroy, adds depth to your entire novel. Oh.
What are the essential elements of a good first page?
I mean, this is just my opinion. A killer first line. Hook me with your first line. First page, I'll get into first page in a second, but seriously, forget the first page. Kill it with your first line. Write me a first line that I will always remember. Oh my gosh, I love a good first line. That'll determine, how fast I'll get to something. Sell me on that first line. A good first page, I'm getting to know your character, but I'm not overwhelmed. A good first page, you are, to me, a good first page isn't dropping me into the middle of action. A good first page isn't disorienting. A good first page is really presenting you with a hook of what the story is going to be about, and it's reeling you in. But your first page, tension should rise throughout your novel. So your first page isn't the most tense page, but it's interesting. Mm-hmm. You're not confusing me with long paragraphs of exposition, but you are slowly easing me into your character and your world and introducing whatever central theme or problem, just a little hint of it, enough that I am interested and I am curious to continue on to the next page. That is a very fine balance. That's a hard thing. First page is make or break it.
Very true.
Yeah.
How do writers avoid the saggy middle?
So for myself, how I avoid that is essentially these days I write to contract. So these days I often work from a full outline where I have the benefit of going through and seeing what the events are going to be in the middle. But, it goes back to what I just said about we want to think about rising tension, rising action. And for myself, what I'll do is I'll have some index cards or something with a couple of scenes plotted out through the middle of the book that I'm very excited to get to. This is my trick. Okay, so middle of the book, whatever scene this is, let's say it's a major character death. Well, I've got that on an index card and I know that's coming. What that does is as I'm drafting, I am more and more excited to get to these points, to get to these scenes that are spread throughout the middle of the book. Mm-hmm. It causes me to naturally have the tension be rising because I am excited to get there. It helps to drive the story forward. It gives added momentum when you know what your big, exciting scenes throughout the middle of the book are.
How do you craft a compelling ending?
For myself, I always know my ending ahead of time. When I'm writing a book, I need to know the end. I need to know the last line. Having that in my head the whole time allows me to stick the landing, if that makes sense. And I mean, so really what I'm telling you here is I pre-plan a lot. I know people talk about the pantsing and the fun, and it is fun. One of my hobbies is role-playing, collaborative writing with other people, because I can turn off my internal editor. Nobody's watching. I can make stupid typos, and nothing has to make that much sense, except to the person I'm writing with. And so I still write for fun, and I do these sorts of things where I am making things up on the fly. That's a great skill, and it's wonderful to be able to write quickly. I think that helps me to draft quicker when I'm writing professionally. But the truth is, when I'm writing professionally, a lot of planning goes into it up front to ensure that like all of the elements are going to work together and that I can stick that ending.
Are there website or tools that you find helpful when you're drafting?
This is terrible, but honestly, I use Microsoft Word. I have a small laptop. I have a Lenovo ThinkPad. It weighs like 2 pounds, and I will take it to the library. Here's what's helpful to me: disconnecting from the internet and distractions. So like the tools, my toolkit is essentially like not so much a website, but it's writing in the same place every day or writing at the same time every day and doing little things to clue my brain into, yes, ADHD, it's time to focus now. So by doing that and by having like a routine with my writing, I am able to more successfully draft when I'm in certain places. One of my favorites, I live across the street from my local library, and I often write in their quiet room. That really helps me to focus. Surrounding myself with other folks who are also like working and quiet and focused, it's just perfect. And they have a rule about silencing technology, and so it's like my distraction-free zone. I'd say that's my biggest help. I honestly write in Word. I have a lot of friends who love things like Scrivener, but I'm not fancy. I have a lot of books. I don't know what to tell you. Microsoft Word, it'll do it every time. It's old-fashioned, but it works.
How does your author-agent relationship work? Does your agent help you decide what to write next, or do you like pitch ideas to decide what would be more marketable, or do you just write it and let her sell it after?
No, that's a great question. I've actually done a little bit of everything. I have like old manuscripts I've given her that we've then pitched and sold and revised together. I will sometimes say I'm going to work on a new picture book. I'll give her a list of ideas and we'll pick something that we're both excited about. These days, typically, I'm writing for an editor. So like they might have something. I have a book coming out called Bigfoot's Big Heart. It's a cryptid Valentine's Day. It's with Viking. It's really fun. But how that came about was my editor said, "Hey, Sarah, we're short a Valentine's Day book for our list for the coming season. Do you want to write one?" And I said, "Oh, sure. Can it be about Bigfoot?" And she said, "That's weird, but okay." And that's got started. So sometimes it's a conversation between editor and me rather than with my agent. But as far as like my own original projects and what I'm doing next, it's generally driven by me. And not all agents are that way, but that's my agent is called Caitlin. That is my relationship with Caitlin, and that is why I like being with her. She covers all the age ranges and genres, and so I feel incredibly supported regardless of what I choose to write. So I feel a lot of creative freedom with her. We collaborate very well when we do get into the editorial process. I'm actually waiting on her notes right now. I just wrote my first adult book. My first original adult full length. It's a big book. It's like 130K. She's probably gonna tell me to cut like a third of this. It's a monster. But it's my first adult book. It's a romantasy, so it's like very spicy fantasy romance with like very low world building, low magic. I love it. It's all about the character dynamics. It's called We Could Be Anti-Heroes, and I'm really excited about it. So I'm waiting on her notes on that right now. I basically told her, "Hey, Caitlin, I'm getting a little tired of writing YA. I want to stretch my wings in a new direction. And I want to write some very spicy content because I'm good at it and it's something I do on the internet. And she was like, okay, let's do it. And I love that freedom. So that's what I'm exploring right now, is breaking into adult.
What do you think how do you view the future of children's and YA literature?
Wow, that's a great question. So nowadays, books have to compete with so many other forms of media that kids are really into. And I think that's very difficult. So realistically, books are going to have to be very exciting, very attention grabbing. They might have to be briefer for kids. But in general, I see kids and YA as moving toward more and more inclusivity, which I really love seeing. I think when I wrote Reign of the Fallen, I didn't think that it would sell because it has a bisexual main character. And I didn't think that the industry was going to accept that. I thought that was going to get maybe go to an indie press that was LGBT press or something. I didn't think that it would be. And so I was, at my imprint, I was the first bisexual author writing fantasy. And that sounds so weird because it wasn't that long ago. But so I think that came out in 2018. I think it sold in 2016. So you look at, we're 2024. So it's 8 years. In the span of 8 years now, so many different diverse books. I can point you to so many bi fantasy authors or characters now in the YA space, in the kidlit space. We're going to see more and more and more viewpoints welcomed in. I think that's going to become the norm. And I think that's really important because I can't be your token bisexual author because sexuality is not a monolith and I only speak for myself. And so yikes, I don't want to speak for a group of people. I can't. I'm not them. And so I just think we're going to see a lot more inclusion, a lot more different viewpoints. I think there's going to be pressure to make things very exciting to compete with other forms of media. And I think we may see a lot more media tie-in type stuff, Netflix shows, crossovers, things like that.
And as far as YA and adult, since now you're dipping your toes in the adult arena too, what do you think of the trends? What do you think is going to be based on what you hear in the industry? What do you think is going to be the next thing, or what's now?
I read industry newsletters and stuff. Romantasy right now is all anyone wants in adult. I will tell you that straight up, and that's going to bleed into YA. Everybody wants romantasy. So basically, fantasies that don't require complex magic systems, don't require a lot of thought to immerse you into the world. Fourth Wing is going to be an example. I know the second book got very heavy on world building, apparently, but Fourth Wing is a great example of a romantasy. Some of the Sarah J. Maas books are also a good example. That's what I know editors and book scouts and everyone are asking for. They are looking for, and they're also looking for things that can quickly sell as movies and TV. That's the other thing they're looking for. They're really looking for more of the film tie-in stuff that I mentioned.
Okay, anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah, I have a question. Regarding your titles, I thought the Bigfoot and Big Fart was really cute. Were you able to keep your titles, or did you have to sort of compromise on some of those?
Thank you for the great question. Oftentimes I'm able to keep them. So Fear of the Drowning Deep, The Girls Are Never Gone, Reign of the Fallen, I came up with those. Bigfoot's Big Heart, I came up with that. Most of the time, yeah, I've kept my own titles. I will say the one time I didn't was the sequel to Reign of the Fallen ended up being called Song of the Dead. I think I sent that in as Rise of the Fallen because it's about the dead people rising up. And I was like, oh yeah, Rise of the Fallen. I got my edits back and they were like, by the way, the book's called Song of the Dead now. We took a vote. I was like, okay. That wasn't even a title that I made up. They were like, it's called Song of the Dead. And I was like, all right. But in general, I've made my own titles. Like 90% of the time. Yeah. Thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
Hello?
Jump right in.
Hi, sorry. You mentioned something, having action dialogue and something when you're writing. I can't remember the last line.
I didn't catch the last line of.
When you were talking and you said you want a good mix of action, dialogue, and she said she missed the third one.
Thank you for the question. Action, dialogue, and description.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Surroundings, character, sensory details, that type of thing.
Thank you so much. I've been killing myself over what that last one was because I knew it was very important.
Description.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Sarah?
Carl has one in the chat.
Okay, Carl.
So my question was, when do you give up on querying?
When do you, okay, let's break this down.
Yeah. When you're like, just, it's stupid. You're the world has spoken.
How do you know what? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will say this, because I've asked this before too.
Mm.
And my friend Jody Meadows, she's a New York Times bestselling author. When I asked her this question, you know what she made me do? She made me hold her first 16 manuscripts. She printed them all out. She had 16 that got rejected before she signed with an agent. 16 books rejected before she got that yes. And so she's made me hold them. Man, that's heavy. It's to hold that. How do you know when to give up on querying? Well, here's the thing. If your query is getting you all no's, the problem is your query. If you're getting requests for material from agents, then your query's working and your pages suck. It may not mean the whole book sucks. I mean, typically, and I sound so harsh, but typically what I see is if the first couple of chapters are off enough that all the agents are being put off by them, there are flaws in the entire manuscript that are going to need to be worked on, right? Those few chapters don't exist in isolation. So if your query is just getting stopped, you need to revise your query. Your query isn't working. I would be asking you, have you looked at a catchy log line? Have you selected appropriate comp titles for your book? Have you crafted a summary that's less than 200 words that's very attention grabbing? If you're getting no's on your query, you need to work on your query. If you're getting no's on requested material, you need to go back, go to your critique partners, find new critique partners, and dig into your material again. Because if you're getting to the request stage, it's your material failing you, not the query.
Love that. Any other questions? Okay, where can everybody connect with you?
So I am on Instagram at Sarah Marsh Author. I'm technically on Twitter. I will not call it X. I think it's silly. I'm on Twitter at SG_Marsh. I'm not typically there. Sarah Marsh Author on Instagram is a great place to find me, or my website is www.sarahglennmarsh.com.
Awesome. And you're also on Facebook too, if they want to see adorable baby pictures.
Yes. Yep. Pictures of my dogs, my birds, and my daughter, Dawn. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for all the wonderful questions. It was really great being here, and I hope you all have a great night.
Yeah, have a good night, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you again, Sarah. You have been brilliantly informative, and we so appreciate it.
That wraps up today's Craft Chat Chronicles with JD Mayor. Thanks for joining us. If you liked the episode, please comment, subscribe, and share. For show notes, writing workshops, and tips, head to jdmayor.com. That's jdmayor.com. While you're there, join JD's mailing list for updates, giveaways, and more.